Welcome back, adventurers. I'm your host, R.R. Slugger, and today we take flight to the breathless skies above the Himalayas in set 7415, Aero Nomad. Johnny Thunder leads this airborne expedition and has wisely put on a thick leather jacket and black winter gloves. Not only will he have the cold climate to contend with, but the freezing temperatures of high altitude as well. Additionally, Everest would be the final time we would see Johnny Thunder with this particular leg printing, changing his trousers before China. Returning once again for some high-flying adventure is Dr. Kilroy, making his second appearance within this wave. Here, he accompanies Johnny after his close call with Sam Sinister in The Secret of the Tomb. The two are well equipped for nearly any situation, hauling a large assortment of tools and provisions for the journey ahead. Collectively, all of the parts in dark gray are essentially making their final appearance here within 2003. This legacy color that saw germination in the world of LEGO tools back in the late 1970s ultimately met its maker at the end of this year. While not an outright toy line tragedy or anything, I pay this moment special mind, as dark gray was one of my favorite LEGO colors. Its bluish replacement loses the warm, lived-in hues of its predecessor and feels altogether more sterile, for good and for bad. Had the Orient expedition released in 2004, after the massive color purge, I doubt I would have as much affinity for it. Seriously. The color of LEGO really matters to me. Among some of the more noteworthy tools here are a pair of brown snowshoes, exclusive to the Orient expedition. This handheld rope climber is required by LEGO law to be included in any early 2000s set that has a zipline. In fact, the zipline itself has a number of retiring pieces within it, all of which making their final appearance here. The Aero Nomad itself depicts a fully fleshed out hot air balloon. This is actually the second attempt at one within the Adventurers series, the first hailing from the theme's inaugural year, 1998. I would be remiss as your host not to juxtapose the two against each other here, so let's compare and contrast the differences between them. Firstly, I want to address the various similarities between these two designs. The balloons themselves are largely constructed using two tan 8x8 octagonal dome pieces, one for the top, the other for the bottom, both being exclusive to these sets. Additionally, each balloon features rigging along the top of the envelope, using a string net and rubber bands to secure it in place. I've long since replaced the rubber bands used in my sets, as LEGO historically used elastics of varying longevity. The similarities begin to dissipate as we move further down. However, there are a few more notable parallels. These large black suspension cables connect the basket of each aircraft to its corresponding balloon. These parts are quite rare to find, and each set requires 4 of them to complete. Here's where the differences truly start to manifest, though. The 1998 balloon connects these elements directly to the basket, whereas the 2003 model interjects 4 more parts to extend the rigging. There is a trade-off to be had here, though. While providing much easier access to the basket itself, by extending these supports, the balloon begins to appear disproportionate and starts to strain credulity. I don't think the Aero Nomad would be truly airworthy with such a small envelope, even if it relied on flammable gases lighter than air for lift. In contrast, the 1998 model proportionately appears to be more airworthy, even if it does include a basket made out of castle wall pieces. The Aero Nomad's basket, by comparison, uses some notable elements of its own. Surprisingly enough, these curved railing pieces are making their final appearance in tan here. Below them rest a quartet of curved plates that might fly under the radar of the average modern builder. While they may appear mundane and common on the surface, these elements are molded in the original brown color and are exclusive to the Orient expedition. We'll see them one more time before the series is complete, but needless to say, they remain rare to this day. You might have already noticed this motorized propeller attached to the Aero Nomad's rigging. Well, it's anchored by a set-exclusive clip piece in the old dark gray color. technically, I think that would classify this vessel as a thermal airship. But every real-world example I could find of this looked far more like one of Johnny's previous aircraft, rather than the hot air balloon design we see here. I'm certainly no expert, but while I was able to find some modern examples of hot air balloons equipped with propellers, I think this was probably a rather anachronistic detail to include in the set. If you are an expert though, please prove me wrong. Remember, 1925 is the year we're working with here. Both sets feature a burner below the envelope, as well as a fuel line to the propane tank. Going into making this video, I expected the Aero Nomad's basket to feature more details than its predecessor, and it does, but I didn't expect the 1998 model to be this robust. Really, both models go a long way towards selling the believability of their respective designs. One detail retained is the inclusion of detachable sandbags for ballast. The original set utilized 4 quite rare light gray minifigure heads for this, whereas the Aero Nomad makes use of the much more readily available color of yellow. Lastly, the Aero Nomad includes one additional feature in the winch system attached to the side of the basket. This allows for hauling cargo or making use of the before-mentioned zipline. Of the two, I think the build from 1998 is a bit more believable from an in-universe perspective, though it's certainly worth noting that I feel the Aero Nomad from 2003 makes for a superior toy. In the end, this comparison is essentially moot in a practical respect though, as the 1998 model is just a side build in a much larger, more expensive kit. Realistically, you won't be in a scenario where buying one or the other is an apples-to-apples decision, unless you opt to part one of these out from scratch like I did. If you're like me, then you're probably left wondering if flying a hot air balloon to the top of Mount Everest even makes any sense in the first place. Well, I'm here to tell you that after hours of research, I still don't know if it makes any sense. It's possible, but well, it's complicated. In 1931, Swiss physicist Auguste Piccard flew to an astonishing 51,000 feet, or roughly 15,000 meters, in a balloon fitted with a metal cabin. For reference, the height of Mount Everest is only 29,000 feet, or 8,800 meters in comparison. Somewhat tangential, but besides being the inspiration for the appearance of Professor Calculus in The Adventures of Tintin, and Jean-Luc Picard's namesake in Star Trek, Auguste Piccard really is a spitting image of Dr. Cyber, isn't he? What a guy. All of this is to say that while a hot air balloon could theoretically travel to the top of Mount Everest, I was unable to find a contemporary example of someone doing so. Remember, it was still debatable whether or not someone had even summited the mountain conventionally at this point. So, what about a non-contemporary example? Fast forward 60 years, and we would find Chris Dewhirst and his team being credited as the first folks to pilot a hot air balloon over Mount Everest. The story is really fascinating, but I'll link to the documentary detailing it, rather than recite it all here. Suffice to say, it is technically possible to fly a hot air balloon over Mount Everest. So is that what our gang is doing here? Flying a hot air balloon to the top of the mountain? Well, the answer to that depends on the source material we use, and that might be the most contestable element of this set so far. The purpose of the Aero Nomad varies wildly from description to description, with some insisting that we are indeed headed to the top of the mountain. Some descriptions provide the detail of looking for the Temple of Mount Everest from the air, which makes a lot of sense to me. This is perhaps a topic for the next video in this series, but it does have a great deal of relevance here. Where exactly is the temple located? Because I can say with 100% certainty, it isn't at the top of Mount Everest. Ignoring the fact that no one is believed to have ever even attempted to summit the mountain prior to 1921, it would be nigh impossible to haul resources and materials to construct a building like this at such altitudes. They don't call it the death zone for fun. In my mind, the temple would have to be located much lower on the mountain in order to suspend my disbelief about its existence at all. This has a fairly substantial impact on the function that the Aero Nomad serves. No longer is it a means to specifically gain altitude, but rather a way to bypass the difficult terrain of the region. Of all the interpretations, I think I like the incarnation from the LEGO magazine best. The gang board the balloon outside the Scorpion Palace and proceed to use it to enter into the Himalayas. We can even see taller mountains surrounding them on all sides, confirming that we're not at the top of the world. It's less a matter of the capabilities of the aircraft and more about the plausibility of the destination. Whatever the actual utility behind the set truly is, I think the Aero Nomad remains a fitting follow-up to its pioneering forebearer. We wouldn't see hot air balloon design quite like this again from the LEGO group, and the Orient expedition served as a true last hurrah for many of these elements. Just like its equivalently sized set from India, the Aero Nomad contains 5 cards for the Orient Expedition board game. Starting with Dr. Kilroy, besides his change in attire, his stats are identical to what they were in India. It may seem strange that we don't get a card for Johnny Thunder as well, but he'll be back next episode. Our next card is one of a trio of tools, the Pickaxe. Offering a +2 bonus to a character's strength, this middling accessory provides a decent benefit, but not nearly as advantageous to acquire as our next item, the Rifle. +4 to a character's strength makes the rifle a potent weapon, more than doubling even the strongest base character stat. The last item card we receive here is the Sextant. This tool grants a +2 bonus to a character's speed, but I'd argue that it's the interaction with the last of the 5 cards that might really draw a player to pick it up. The Aero Nomad balloon functions as a vehicle like any other within the game, and the Sextant can be used to bypass the challenges required to pilot it. Altogether, the Aero Nomad adds a solid number of tools into the game, with another character and vehicle to boot. At this point, we're about ready to disembark for the Temple of Mount Everest, but before taking off, let's take a look at what alternate builds await us on the back of the box. This first model appears to be an alternate aircraft of sorts, making good use of the balloon, rigging, and propeller of the main build. There is a large area for storing tools in the back, and the lack of fuel line on the propane tank build from earlier makes me wonder if this is supposed to represent bottled oxygen. Either way, while I think much of the design work is fairly solid here, you won't have this model constructed for long, as the rare and expensive rigging elements are under constant strain, and slightly warping the entire time this thing exists. Despite the kooky steampunk appeal, I dismantled mine pretty much immediately. The second alternate build seems to represent a fort or watchtower in my estimation. It certainly doesn't look like it can fly, that's for sure. Regardless, there isn't much to talk about here, as the model is rather limited, even missing a golden opportunity to utilize one of the included rubber bands to secure these supports together. While the idea is cute, the execution is rather lackluster, I must say. I'd probably steer clear of both of these models, unfortunately. Luckily, the main build is competent enough to warrant its existence without relying on support from the back of the box. It's not my favorite offering from Orient Expedition, but I think it does a lot of things right. Perhaps most importantly, it gives us a standalone hot air balloon within the Adventurer series, for those who don't want to dig out their wallets for a more sought-after set from 1998. That should just about wrap up our look at the Aero Nomad today. From here, we're going to continue our search for the Temple of Mount Everest and the Golden Sword of Marco Polo. I hope to see you there. I've been your host, R.R. Slugger, and I'll see you next time for another adventure.